the idea that like a TV show, this escape, this fictional world felt more real than what you were really experiencing is a trauma response.
Dissociation. Hi, I'm Kat.
And I'm Gabe. And we're the Pink
Opaque. Not literally, though.
Yeah. We are the media literacy show from a horror lens where we explore the real life, historical, and psychological, societal influences behind our cinematic fears. And today we are wrapping up our Teenager Scare Me series with our last millennial themed horror film that kind of came in on the tail end of what we were exploring and was recommended by fans and friends alike. We are going to be talking about I Saw the TV Glow.
Yeah, big sads.
Big sads, and very interesting. When we were kind of knee deep in this series, I watched it because like every person I talked to for like I feel like several months was like, have you seen this yet? Have you seen it yet? And I was like, no. And like I miss going to see it in the theaters with people, and everyone was like, no, you have to see it. I have to know what you think. And whenever people say that to me, I take that, really strongly because they care. Right?
Yeah.
I encounter a lot of people who had not seen It Follows, and because our episode are like, oh, I went out and watched it, and you were correct. It is great for like all the way through. No complaints. Was wonderful. So, I love that we have that impact on, influencing people to watch things, but also that they have that influence on us to watch things. And so I watched it on my own just because I was like, let me see what it's about. And I like, after just sitting with it, I texted Kat and I was like, no, we got to do it. Like, I'm sorry, we're covering this, babe. It's going on the list.
Yeah.
Like, immediately.
And I mean, I'm really glad we did, honestly, because I like watch it. I didn't realize it got me so much in my feelings. It's kind of like, I'm going to do a lot of comparison between it and like Talk to Me. And like both like made me very sad. But like, I was like, oh yeah, no, I see why we're covering this. It's saying a bunch. It's saying so many things with such a short amount of time. It was a deeply emotional movie.
Yeah, I watched the director's first film. We're all going to the World's Fair during Sundance when I was covering Sundance in 2020, which is like a wild time. And I remember covering that, and it was such an interesting film. It's one that I really want to go back to. And I remember having similar feelings of just like sitting there and just like having to unpack my own feelings and then like, and also watch it. Like, it's a mood for sure. And that's what they really convey in their work is like, they want you to sit with it. They're putting themselves into it. And there's also this kind of overlapping of a mutual experience and then like your own experience. So there's like these three layers of what you're going to experience when you're watching them. And this was like no different. I do think this one I liked significantly more, just because I think it hit in a specific way.
I agree that this one hit in a very specific way, as you said.
Yeah. And, I will say for folks who are, horror fans or just like, I don't know. Yeah, it is horror, to be quite honest. There's some really spooky things that happen and scary, tense things. It is, more on like the art house vibes, it is giving like nothing is quite clear. There are moments where I felt like it was very tell, don't show. Where it's like literal characters standing in front of you telling you what happened. That I still think like gave to some of the parts of the film, but some of it I was like, well, this is a long you were like talking monologue. For a long time. And it didn't feel the way that like with Pearl when she was going long, I was like, okay, I feel something with this. And I got so much film with that it didn't feel like I was missing out.
Yeah.
There were some times where I was like, okay, like I wouldn't say it's my favorite film ever.
No.
But I will say that was a good one, and that it was happy to have watched it.
Yeah, I feel mutually. Like, it was like, there were lots of times where I was just very confused by what was happening. But, like, I am glad I watched it. It was definitely just like, this is weird. But, like, also I like weird stuff. So, like, that part was positive. But I could also see it, like, not being something everyone would enjoy because of the weirdness.
Yeah, I think, like, there's not a lot to take at face value. Like, you can't really believe the world, like, take it, as it is presented and be literal with what's happening. Because when you're literal with it, it's like, this person's crazy. I thought a lot about actually Undone. Remember the animated film series where she struggled with schizophrenia, I believe, and it had that similar thing of, like, someone clearly is struggling with gripping
Mental
reality,
health,
and is it real? Is this call to action, to adventure, real? Like, are they really a special chosen person, or are they suffering a delusion and in need of help? So, like, there is, like, if you like, there's two ways to interpret what is being shown to you on screen. And I saw the TV Glow. I didn't get so much the magical realism because I really just had to dismiss what was on screen as real. I had to dismiss that pretty quickly to be able to accept what was happening.
Yeah. I had a lot of conflicting emotions with it, where mostly it's like, what I'm going to talk about in my section is, like, what I enjoyed and took away from it. But, like, I don't know if that's the same experience everyone would have watching the movie. It was like, this was my very personal takeaway from the movie. And I don't know if that's, as the reality is in question, ultimately. Yeah.
And to be like honest, I think that the director, Jane Schoenbrunn, would, like, appreciate that. I think that's a part of what something like this is created for, is for us to put ourselves into the place of Owen. And many people have been in that very same place and been exploring their lives and their understanding and interpretation of self and the world around them, and had to struggle through and make those decisions. And so I think, like, taking it and be like, we've said that so many times on the show, that once you create something and you put it out there in the world, it is now everybody's, right? Like, everyone is free to interpret it in the ways that they do. And some things are intentional, some things are unintentional, but it happens. And I think there's something beautiful about, like, being able to see yourself, or to be able to feel, like, connected and have emotional attachment to what's happening on screen. Like, I think that shows, like, a really great job for, like, the actors and the writing of it, for us to be able to connect with that person who isn't us, but to still like feel things strongly about this fictional world you just made.
Yeah. No, and it makes you feel a lot of things. And I would say, it's just stressful. I would give that as, like, the disclaimer for it. Like, it's not like, haha, it's very, like, oh no, this poor baby. Yeah. I need to protect this human. And then you can't, because you're in a screen.
Yeah.
You're behind a screen. You can't help the person that you're witnessing. And that's very stressful and kind of powerlessness feeling.
Yeah. Definitely, like, my heart hurt from the whole time. I don't think there were a time where I was like, oh, good. I think I was like, oh God, what's happening?
Feel mutually. Yeah. But, like, also, it's like, I get why, especially, like, knowing the writer, like, reading about the writer and, like, their life and stuff. I was just like, no, I get why you did this.
Yeah.
But also,
and I'm excited to see and, like, learn. Yeah. So why don't we hop into it so people can hear about this film and our thoughts. And as always, we'd love to hear yours. Please leave us some comments, especially on YouTube. It's helpful on what you thought of I Saw the TV Glow. So let me tell you about I Saw the TV Glow, which is from 2024, which is why it was smacked on at the end of our series here. And it's about two teenagers bond over their love of a supernatural TV show, but it is mysteriously canceled. And it is directed by Jane Schoenbrunn.
That is such a vague description of what is I think that's what you're about to say. But like,
yeah, it really is.
Funny.
It really is. It's like, okay, sucks. Because that's all I knew when I went into the film. All I knew was that there's like a TV show that they're obsessed with, and they're gonna bond over it, and that it's giving like I'll say it too, like Are You Afraid of the Dark kind of, like Monster of the Week, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, like even yeah, that is Are You Afraid of the Dark? Because what do they call it? The Midnight Society. You know, so like, and it's the Midnight Realm. So yeah, that's what I went in, and then the movie happened, and I was like, well, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's a longer bit about what happens in this film. We will be covering like the big twist that does occur in the film. So if that is like, if twists and like, you know, reveals or something that you really, really cherish and want to experience organically, then watch the film and then come back and listen to us. Otherwise, you may find that like knowing that will help inform and make you a better, more intentional viewer. Because you're like, oh, I'm looking for these things, I'm anticipating that, and then you're not blown away in the middle and you're like, wait, what?
And like you went in blind, and then I went in knowing everything, and I like totally had like I was like media analysis classes the entire time, because I was like, oh, I know this is going to be tragic and what the ending is, and that really influenced how I viewed it, versus I guess like, you know, you have to watch it twice, which is also good. Yeah, and the second time I think was a lot better for me, to be quite honest. So our personal opinion might be to it's okay, because I think it helps you kind of see where it like in experience the film more intentionally, like I said. But again, if that is something that you really care about, here's the spoiler warning as it's happening, because we're just gonna get into it, which means we will be talking about like some of those bigger things. So Owen, who is a young middle school boy, meets the moody, mysterious Maddie during election night in 1996. 1996. And he quickly bonds with this girl over a Monster of the Week sci-fi horror series called The Pink Opaque, about two girls who battle against monsters sent by the villainous Mr. Melancholy and his associates, Marco and Polo. And it is very reminiscent of, like I said, Are You Afraid of the Dark? Like, honestly, the intro video, like I always think of like this swing, like in the beginning of Are You Afraid of the Dark? It looked kind of like that when I was watching. And Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which is a notoriously Monster of the Week series. And it felt very, and it felt very nostalgic and haunting, especially for Buffy, that had like a lot of like, for like queer femmes, like lesbian awakenings, but also like a representation of a lesbian witch. And this unfortunately does have like a literal bury your gays trope. But kind of a good thing. I might have time to say that. I did mean to mention that at some point. But, there's so much to say. I didn't even get into it. But that happens in Buffy. Bury the gays happens there. But so while not exactly friends, the two hold the show in such reverence, clutching it as a life raft in the sea of uncertainty and repression of their small suburban town, that they do become kind of close over that, right? A few years of sparse secret meetings to watch or discuss the show, Maddie asks Owen to run away with her. Hold on, this would be after a few. Oop, I'm going to resay that. After a few years of sparse secret meetings to watch or discuss the show, Maddie asks Owen to run away with her because she feels very strongly that this town will kill her if she stays. She does not know how or why. She just knows that if she stays here, she will die, which is a sentiment I feel like a lot of us have had. I left. So I went very far away and have not been back since. But similar vibe.
Exactly. I was like, no, I'm out of here. But frightened, Owen runs back home and later finds that Maddie had disappeared without a trace, and their sanctuary show, the Pink O'Pank, is coincidentally also canceled. at the same time. So after a handful of years with Owen growing and molding himself into the performative adult he is asked to become, he encounters Maddie once again. She's older now, has a new name, and has very clearly changed. Way more, I don't want to say confident, but she definitely feels like herself. And also a little bit like Tara. She's wearing Tara clothes, which is one of the characters from that TV show. She drops some really intense news on Owen after asking him what he remembers of their favorite show, and more importantly, the events surrounding their watching. She says something like, "Don't you ever feel like it doesn't match up? Like it doesn't make sense what you're remembering. Like that doesn't feel real. Like and not having real memories is so scary." And so then Owen thinks back on his history and his moments of happiness with Maddie. Only now we don't just see these moments of him watching the show with her. We also see these clips of him in a dress. And he is happy in this opportunity to be himself. And there's like this really soft, like caring look of affection that like Maddie has towards him when he's in that dress. Where it's like, you know, like look at you. Like look at you know?
Yeah. Witnessing happiness and like true authentic self is beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And so like he had forgotten that he even had that. And this whole time he had just thought they were watching TV together. And so then on top of that, Maddie tells Owen that the Pink Opaque isn't a show at all, but the truth, like reality, that the heroines he watched battle absurd villains like the Ice Cream Man were actually he and Maddie, that Owen is Isabel and Maddie is Tara. Right? And that they've been tricked by Mr. Melancholy and buried deep underground away from each other. And the only way to return to their former lives is to bury themselves, to kill these midnight realm versions of themselves before they die in their real world, because they are actively suffocating, right? So he says, having you notice that you're failing health, right? Your inability to breathe. And it's something that you're watching on screen. Like you see him start to like wheeze, and his like asthma and health issues get worse as time goes on. And essentially, you know, we're told that Maddie was right, that this town was going to kill them. Yeah. Because it was doing that, right? And so when Maddie offers him one more chance to escape, to join her on the other side of his true self as Isabel, Owen is once again frightened, and he runs away from that opportunity and straight into the performative life that's been killing him slowly. He says in the show, "It was time for me to become a man, a real adult, a productive member of society." And then we see him do that. He's like, "I even have kids of my own," and we don't see them. We don't see that family. No. We don't see what he like. We do not see that. We just see him tell us that, and he gets a bigger TV, right? He's getting with the times, right? Yeah. Time moves forward again, and we see Owen now a middle-aged adult, although significantly worse for wear. Like he is not that much older, but he's fallen apart. Now he works at an arcade, this fun zone, and he moves through the space withered and wheezing, that breathing significantly worse. And he has this like truly heartbreaking breakdown moment during a child's birthday party where he lets out an existential, heart-wrenching cry. And please, he says he is dying. He calls for his mom. Like it's really just like you could get so caught up in just how distraught that is and how heartbreaking it is. And then on top of that, everyone stops moving.
Yeah, they just like totally freeze. Ignore. Yeah.
Not even just ignore, they freeze. Yeah. They stop moving.
Reality stops. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's just having this breakdown and losing it. You know, and it's like, it's the second time we've seen him lose it to this degree. One time when he came to the conclusion, like when he watched the finale and it was clear that he was Isabel, and his dad is like trying to brainwash him again, that he cries and he says like, "You're not my father, like I don't belong here." And that same heartbreak is here again, and it's just like he does an amazing performance. Justice is just phenomenal. And then he, like I said, the people pause. They're just unfeeling, unattentive. They do not care about Owen. They're not real. And he stumbles to the bathroom where, standing before a mirror, carves into his own chest, opening it to reveal the glowing static of a TV screen, confirming his otherness and the truth that he's in the Midnight Realm. In an upsetting and equally heartbreaking ending, Owen seals himself back up and then staggers back out onto the arcade floor, and he just mutters apologies to those around him, none of which acknowledge his presence. So he just, sorry about earlier, sorry. And it's very, like, it's kind of giving Morty, Rick and Morty, like the way he says it, but it is devastating because he's just like shuffling about and you're like, Owen, this was your chance. And So let's talk about A Tale of Transition, and this idea that sometimes the pink opaque feels more real than real life, which is what Maddie, discloses to Owen in one of their sleepovers, letting him know that she doesn't feel home here, which, like, in like the fact that it was true that she really was from this other world is one thing, but like for a lot of people who were not from another world, that still felt real. The idea that like a TV show, this escape, this fictional world felt more real than what you were really experiencing is a trauma response.
Dissociation.
So my first time watching I Saw the TV Glow, I was absolutely speechless and numb after the ending. Like I literally sat there and I like didn't do or say anything, and like my husband came in and was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then they were like, did you like the film? And I was like, I don't know. Because I really was just like, I have to unpack this. Like, I really was like, I don't know what to do with what I've become. And honestly, my heart just really went out to poor Owen. And I was also like I was really sad for him, but I was also really mad. Like, for a good amount of it. Like, the second time watching it, I felt a little more bad for him. But the first time I was mad, right? Because I questioned why he'd choose to ignore the call to adventure that so many of us wish would find us, right? To be told that the feeling of otherness that you've experienced all of your life was valid and that you really did belong somewhere else. Like, I couldn't tell you how many times I wish somebody like knocked on my door and was like, "You're a wizard," like,
or like, "You're an alien, let's go home to your real planet." Like,
like, oh,
anyone,
like, you're a fairy and you got swapped at birth and now I can steal you
the
back
reason
to
you
the
feel this
forest.
way is real, and you were right the whole time. Actually, let me save you.
You aren't actually a people, and it's okay.
It's almost like the oppressive society that we live in does that on purpose. Sorry,
yes. And honestly, I was just feeling like, as horrifying as the reality was, like the truth of what Isabel and Tara endured in the real world, like in the pink opaque, as scary as that is, of them fighting Mr. Melancholy and all, and the milk and all the Luna juice, all that stuff, so wild, scary, right? Still, I just felt like that chance at being your true magical self felt like an obvious answer, right? And every time Owen ran away from Maddie/Tara's attempts to free him in each stage of his life, I was disappointed to find him wrapping himself in the comfort and normalcy and status quo. Like, to just go, I gotta... Yes, exactly. I gotta be the man that the world told me I gotta be. It's like,
gotta eat the imaginary steak and then murder all these people. It's similar.
Yes, you gotta eat the steak. I do stand by. I think I would stay in the Matrix, but it's okay. But for all the disappointment, I did really understand why he did it too. Right? And I did just really, like, surface level for like what's happening in the film. Like, that's just a scared little boy. And like when he goes in and cries that first time and is like, "You have to tell my dad and like save me from this crazy thing that's happening," it really isn't like the literal like save me from the fact that this girl's trying to run away. It's save me from what I'm tempted to do. Right? It's save me from what save me because I've seen that I'm different, right? And so I just
Yeah.
really resonated with that primal fear of being an other, and that simply acknowledging that you are different opened a door to an unknown world that could hold even more horrors and discomfort, right? It's really about choosing the devil that you know.
Yeah.
So every time he was like, nope, okay, like, this is scary, I don't want to do that. That sounds really, because what if you're wrong also? But like, besides that, it really is like, you're asking me to do a big thing here.
Yeah. And like,
that's
even though his
scary.
and even though his like attachments were not great, like his dad sucked, he did love his
Mm-hmm.
mom, and like
Mm-hmm.
he was staying for that
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else, and it was just like really sad.
Yeah, and at some point it becomes really hard when
Yeah.
you've played pretend for as long as you have, to kind of accept that call, right? And for director Shane Schoenbrunn, the film is a metaphor for gender dysphoria, right? It's an homage to the experience of living one life while knowing deep down you belong in another. And their depressing ending was intentional and honest. Like we found in the end of It Follows, the lack of concrete answers or triumph feels far more realistic and inspiring, I think, personally. For so many of us, there is no final act or moment when the monsters we battle are defeated and we return to normalcy.
Yeah.
There's no big bad, right? Like if I could be like, I defeated the American government and capitalism and now we can all be free. That's never going to happen, right? Like society's influence on us is always going to be there. Like, but those things where it's like, these big monsters, right? There's really no time where like, okay, I fought the
and
gender binary and now I could be who I am and everyone's cool about it. Like that's just not going to happen, right?
There's always someone that's not cool about it.
Yeah, it's a constant journey, right?
Yeah.
Transitions and decisions that take us closer to being who we are, and more importantly, comfortable with who we are. So it is a constant battle. It just like, it's not that there's no resolution in the end. It's just that the wins are little like stops along the journey where you're like, oh, I feel a little more comfortable in my skin versus I am completely who I was always supposed to be.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anyone feels that.
Yeah. And I also like, I guess like Owen still being alive at the end always does give like, they could always make the choice tomorrow to finally leave the Midnight Realm. Like,
exactly.
Just continuing to be alive, you're like, oh, there's still hope, even though many would say it's too late. You know what I mean? Because it's not. They're still alive. There's always a tomorrow that they could make that choice. So
yeah, maybe he's finally tired enough.
Yeah.
This idea that transition leaves you traumatized for the rest of your life is something that director Jane Schoenbrunn shared in an article on Vanity Fair titled "The Complex Ending of I Saw the TV Glow Explained." They go on to say trans people will be unpacking pre-transition for as long as they live, as well as many other things out of their control, right? They will always have to reckon with these 2, 3, 4 infinite versions of ourselves, that as we're trying to figure out what that final version or the one that we feel at least most comfortable with is, right? And so for me, when Owen opens himself up, revealing the truth that he's been running from his entire life, right, of the simulation in the Midnight Realm, that is true, he is forced to confront that truth, and that he is in fact different, and that the act of forcing him to conform is actively killing him. Right? Like all those things that were just a whisper in the wind, caution, like possibly dismissed because a crazy person was telling you, you know, like he could have done that. Finally, it's like, you can't fight this. This is real. And Schoenbrunn explains in that interview that Owen has seen something he can't unsee. And they say, what's he going to do with that? For me, you imagine people who are maybe figuring out that they're trans watching this movie. And it's literally true that if you're seeing this message, there is still time. Then there is still time and you haven't suffocated to death, right? Like Kat was just saying, it's not the end for him at all. It's just another part of that story. And that there is still time is like written in chalk. It's the message that Tara leaves them, like to just say like, it's never too late, right? As long as you're here. So just as Jay and Paul in It Follows are walking away, holding hands at the end, that isn't the end of the story, right? Only the end of the film. We are left knowing that something more is going to be happening once we stop watching, right? Like that was not a bow. It's like, oh, they just keep living with the knowledge that they're not completely safe and that something is always falling behind them, right? Like they will always have that, and that's how they move forward in their life. Owen closing himself back up and apologizing to the patrons is not the end of the story either. The director said, the ending says something about the mentality where we as queer people, and especially as trans people, were taught from the youngest age to think of our true selves as inconveniences to everyone around us, or as something to protect the world from. I think it's a very understandable reaction to close yourself back up and apologize for existing, right? That's it. Like Owen has very much been like the first thought kind of thing, like your first reaction. He does not want to step on toes. He doesn't want to make people mad. I think even his counterpart Isabel feels very much like that too. Very like just soft and sweet. And so zipping it up is a reasonable response. It's also really just like so distressing when it's happening because you're like, oh. So I often appreciate bleak endings when they serve a genuine purpose. And I felt that this was very validating. And though it weighed on me heavily, I did understand why, right? I do ultimately feel a little bit concerned about the interpretation of the film as a whole, right? Like how easy it could be misinterpreted that the only way out of the midnight realm is to kill yourself. And like there is some truth to that in the film where Owen needed to not kill himself, but that version of himself that the world told him to mold into. Right. And that's like the metaphorical part of it, right? Like you're not literally burying your gays because they're being reborn. You're burying your straights. You're burying your gender conformity. You're burying like society's expectations and requirements of you, and then you're like being reborn, a phoenix, from the ashes. But I do like it. It distressed me a little bit that if some like a young person who's impressionable might watch that and think like again, because I was thinking of Undone, right? Yeah. And I was thinking if you're struggling with fighting to be here, literally, and then you watch this and the answer was die, because there's a better on the other side. It could very easily just be misinterpreted that the other side is literally an afterlife versus the other side is you coming out as yourself, right? And I think that's what stressed me out again, because I was really connected to like this idea of the show Undone. But like if you take it as like what it's intended to be, which is like bury the self that isn't true, you can then become the person you are, because then he could be free in the pink opaque, right? Not free from horror and trouble, because like we said, it's not a perfect world. It is very scary. There's still the scary ice cream man. There's still Mr. Melancholy and Marco and Polo. They are real, right? But he would be free to be themselves while in that world and while fighting those horrors, right? Which is significantly better and would not be wheezing and dying and would not be full of people telling them that they're not real. Right? So it's not a perfect ending because it's not an ending at all, in my opinion, right? Because Owen isn't dead. And his last moments of apologies, clearly in shock, may be the wake-up call that he finally needed to push his way underground and to ultimately dig up who they were meant to be, which was Isabel.
This film hurt. It was really good, though, in a lot of ways. And there was lots of pieces of it where I was like, oh, I wish it didn't happen like that. It was complicated. It was complicated, but
which is a good film, honestly.
Like when it makes you think a lot of things, it's the main thing that was like a struggle for me was what you said, where it was like at the end, it was like if you go into this in the wrong headspace, you could come out of it feeling really hopeless and sad, and not in a place that is like transformative or growth oriented, and that's like the danger of it. But hopefully you've listened to this episode and you're like, actually, I get it. Like, we need to be ourselves. That's the message, is be yourself and don't suffocate in a place that stifles who you are within, like, your ability to do so.
Be yourself. Be yourself.
That. So, as Gabe was saying, this film was deeply emotional and, although a bit strange, had a lot to say about identity, self-acceptance, and the cost of existing in a society that does not allow for healthy self-expression. If you live in America, it's real blah here right now in terms of like what existing means and the implications of that in all sorts of ways. It's like in a multifaceted ouch time. And the Ghouls are very well versed in the damaging impact of performing an identity that does not feel natural. And I saw the TV Glow shows the impact of that performance in a very brutal and honest way. The tragedy of this film is Owen and their rejection of self. And the real Owen does not meet social norms and expectations for a multitude of reasons of the society that they live in. Obviously, Mr. Melancholy is doing stuff, but like if we're looking at Owen as like a real person who exists in the world, they're performing as best as they can, but in not being themselves, they always feel like they're failing because deep down in Owen's chest, they know something is wrong, or more accurately, something is different about them. So it's like a deeply relatable film. I related to Owen so hard that it made it really hard for me to look at this film objectively. I was so sad. I wanted them to be okay, and it like still bothers me that they couldn't be, but I also get it. I also understand. So unlike most of the other media we've covered in the series, I saw the TV Glow focuses more on like the inner turmoil of this performance, showing that the ones most harmed by an inauthentic self-expression are ourselves. It's less like it harms the world, it's more it harms the person. And there's a weight to the story that I think it was present in some of the other films, but not all of them. Like as well as like a powerlessness, and that felt as emotional and chaotic as I think our teen years can feel. Like I felt like I was kind of transported back to like my child self. Like I was watching my inner child struggle, and I was like, save them. So similar to how Talk to Me showed the painful reality of withholding necessary context from our young people in a way that was uncomfortable, but also very real, I saw the TV Glow shows us a devastating but very honest perspective on the importance of self-acceptance, like the necessariness of it, the necessity of it. And this film impacted me, even though at many points I didn't fully understand what was happening, because I related so much to Owen. And like Owen, there was a deep sadness. Like the actor just did this so well. That I felt like I was watching my child version of it, because like there's just such a deep sadness drenched in like all of their words, their mannerisms, their way of existing and trying to perform that was expected of them, like since they were so little. And just like I just do want to give like
they
major
do Melancholy
props.
so well.
Like I felt their emotion. Like the actor that played Owen really delivered something that felt real and unique, and I just really want to give some kudos to that, because the film highlighted the cost of the performance of false self, and that cost is more than just a person's mental well-being. As Gabe was talking about, like their physical well-being was a big sacrifice too. And to speak to my own experience, through necessity, I've learned like a lot about how trauma can impact the brain and body, and I think that deeply influenced how I took in this film and why I appreciated pieces of it so much. And like Gabe, I would say also that appreciation took a bit to settle. Like at first, I didn't really know how I felt after watching it. I was like, there was definitely like an empathy drain that came from watching, and sort of like a hopelessness as a viewer that you have to sit with at the film's end, where you're just like, ugh, I felt that scream. I have wanted to scream like that before. And I guess it's like also thinking of like, this was a very personal story for the director / writer. It was like about how they felt, and I totally resonate with that. But I also like totally hear what you were saying, Gabe, where it's like, your audience might be impacted by this in a way that is harmful, even though the intention was good. And that's like the main point where I'm like, that's where it kind of like sits with me a little funny. But I also get it. And yeah, there's just an empathy drain that came at the end. And I think for the most part, I appreciated the representation. But with how devastating the end was, I found myself somewhat similar to how I felt at the end of Talk to Me, where I wanted Owen to get a happy ending so badly, but also understood why the writer didn't give us one. And like Gabe, I did feel a bit conflicted. As you said, like, if unaliving is the answer, that shouldn't be but I also get it was deeper than that. So in the burying of yourself could translate to encouraging unaliving, which I'm pretty sure was not the intent, but impact is important. So also be real that I also do feel a little conflicted that both in Talk to Me and I Saw the TV Glow had Black protagonists with such tragic endings written by white writers. So if I had any other critiques about those films, I'd say that those would be the biggest issues that I had. But the performances delivered in both films were very visceral and real, and I think that was like a big strength to the film. Like the people who played it did an amazing job. And I just wish we got some more hope at the end. And without hope and next steps for the viewer to take away, that's like hard. We talked about that with like Don't Look Up, you know, like when you end so sad, you make the audience not really know what to do with that emotion. And again, a lot can be left up to interpretation. That's kind of like what films are. But it would have been cool if we had like some resources at the end or like you know, something to take away that gave a little bit more hope. Other than that, there were good pieces of representation here that I do think were really important. And similarly important, like how I thought Talk to Me like impacted me. I just thought like both were like so depressing, but deeply relatable and like honest to what experiences are. So what really resonated with me, as I said, in this film was its honesty. And in my neurodivergence and gender identity struggles, I've witnessed firsthand the cost of like false and identity, if that makes sense. Like the cost of cortisol releasing into your body at a rate that is constant because you don't feel safe, like both in yourself and in your surroundings. So the weight of performing an identity that felt like very unnatural to me. And what I witnessed in Owen's experience felt really true to how I felt growing up. And society, unfortunately, that we live in, unfortunately makes you feel unsafe being yourself, depending on where you are in the world. And when you're still in a place that is not safe and you have no context or explanation for why, burying that part of yourself that doesn't make sense in the context you do have feels necessary. Like that logically, how Owen handled things. Like if he was not explicitly stated as a neurodivergent character, but like I interpreted him that way. And I think his reaction was very true to that. So when even your body is not safe to be within, when it reacts to your surroundings as if they are poison, it can be easy to wonder if you are not meant for this planet at all, that this reality is the wrong one, that you are in the wrong place, that you are wrong. And when you lack the context for why you are the way you are, and when the people around you, the media you consume, and the history you learn withholds the experiences that you could relate to, being yourself logically feels unsafe. And that was the world that Owen lived in. And this
except
is why,
for the pink opaque. That
was like the beacon.
His glimpse into seeing like, wait, there's a different way to be.
Yeah. And like, that's why representation in media matters so much. This is why banning books and removing important context from historical texts and creating legislation that demonizes entire groups of people is so unbelievably dangerous. And I think that's like what the film was trying to say ultimately, is that like when you erase the context for someone's entire existence through isolation and manipulation of media and manipulation of history, there's so much damage that can be done to a person that is so much deeper than an individual experience. It becomes an experience that so many people can relate to, and honestly, super millennial as well, because that was very much what was happening in media during that time period. It was very watered down. It was very, we are beyond the tragedies of the past. You know, everything's good. Yeah, there's no racism. There's no sexism. Like being a human, be gay, you know, don't be gay though. You can't get married. It was like a whole time, you know, the 90s were a weird time. And like a lot of the representation that did exist was not explicitly stated or was represented by people who weren't actually authentically from that community. So there was a lot of just like happening during that time. It just like didn't make sense, that made this like very millennial in that way too. So this film provided a very honest showcasing on a scientific level of how operating in a constant state of survival causes unhealthy levels of cortisol to be released into the body. When a performance is necessary for survival, the performer lives in a constant state of stress. And we see that in Owen. The cortisol damages much more than the mind and causes the body to deteriorate in other ways. So I think like in a lot of ways, this film was trying to be like, hey, if you don't pull yourself out of this, it feels irrational to be like, you're not going to be okay. but like literally from like a cortisol level, like how that impacts your body is it's going to impact your health and how you are able to exist in the world. So when we see Owen struggle,
years off your life.
Yeah. And yeah, the research surrounding trauma just showcases how much not healing and not getting to a place that is safe damages you both mentally and physically. So we actually see this like represented in real time. We see Owen's body be impacted by the stress that they experience. We see them shrink, suffocate, and deteriorate as like their entire life is playing out in front of our eyes. So the way Owen felt throughout this film could be seen in how they stood, spoke, and moved in the world, how they apologized constantly for just existing. And it was just very real. And is the way that many are forced to exist in a world where anything deemed as other is demonized or dehumanized, where a performance is necessary for survival, but at great cost to oneself. So what we see at the end of I Saw the TV Glow is what many in this country deal with all of their lives. And I think that's what Chardonnay was trying to like express until they cannot take it anymore, literally till they like have to do something different for their own survival. And it's why representation and inclusion are so important, because what happens to Owen at the end of the film is the cost of oppression. And a piece of this film that feels deeply millennial, there's a handful of things, but for the bulk of the plot, Owen is without the words or context to explain who they are. They are fed pieces of themselves across their many years of existence and don't have the full picture until they are so ingrained in their performance that it feels almost too late. And that was super intentional, I think, until they have like sacrificed what feels like too much to turn back. And I think a lot of millennials specifically are in that boat because we weren't fed a lot of the context we needed to understand who we were until we were well into adulthood. So Owen doesn't remember who they were without the performance, to the point where it's like, as you say, Gabe, they're written in the concrete. There's still time, which I think was their way of calling out to the older viewers, the millennial viewers who may be watching this and feel like it's too late to accept themselves, but seeing like the necessity of what could happen if they don't soon figure that out. And Owen and the tragedy of his pained existence, a warning to all of us of the cost of thinking it's too late, of knowing the truth and having that context, but choosing to ignore it. And for many millennials who found themselves through like the TikTok videos, finally gaining access to the representation that was hidden from them until they were well into adulthood, I think the film's intent is to pull us out of our own false realities. So like, speaking to my own experience, not knowing I was autistic till I was like almost 30, not knowing my gender identity or my sexuality till I was like deep in my 20s.
Yeah, like a second puberty, honestly. I've encountered a lot of millennials who feel that way.
Yeah, and it's like you have so many people who are so convinced they know who you are at that point in your life that it's really hard to be like, I am an entirely different person and I was not doing that out of deception.
Yeah.
I literally was dying and I didn't know how to tell that to anybody. And I feel a lot of rage that no one was like, hey, are you okay? And there's a lot of rage that comes with that and just like conflicting emotions that I think a lot of millennials have experienced through that is just so relatable to this film. And I think that's like what they're trying to do, like wake up. And I know it's not safe for a lot of people to wake up to, depending on where you are in the country and in the world. But I think that was the intent. And also it's like kind of like what therapy can do. In some ways, looking through like the snow globe of trauma and our memories that are all jumbled together and like don't make sense. You're like, I don't remember most of my childhood, and like I got these like little pieces of kind of who I was, and I'm piecing that together. Like the person I buried to survive, I don't know who they are or where they are or how to get them back. And that's really scary when you're a whole adult and you're realizing these things about yourself and you're like, fuck. Who is that? Where did they go? How do I get them back? Also, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but what happened to you?
Yeah. So it's like finding our inner child and guiding them back towards a better future. It makes me think of like that trend that was on TikTok where it's like an older version of yourself writing a letter to like your teen self and assuring them that like it's going to be okay, that it gets better, that their sacrifice that helped us survive this long was worth it, and that like we're thankful that they didn't give up you know?
Yeah.
We recognize how much they sacrificed for us to physically be here. And like honoring that. And I think that's something like I'm personally working on myself, is like for I'm listening to my teen self who's really mad and being like, I'm really sorry, but also thank you. And also let's try to feel some of these emotions in a safe way now that we're a grown-up person. And we're no longer as actively in a state of fight or flight and unsafeness. So to those of us who didn't have the words to explain what made us different, and also for those who didn't really understand what that meant for our safety, like forgiving what you had to do to yourself to get through that time, is something you can do to like be nice to yourself, maybe. And another piece of this film that felt very millennial was the use of TV as the main context our characters have for the world that they live in. Millennials, in many ways, were raised by TV. As we discussed in the It Follows episode, many parents were just too busy participating in capitalism to authentically be there for their kids. It was not intentional, but it was the reality that we were in. We had absent parents, many of us. There was like 5 million, I think. It was like a big number. 8 million maybe, that like, that's an experience for a lot of people, especially of the millennial age. So to compensate, many millennial youth turned to screens to learn about the world and used media as context. And as an added layer, although it's not explicitly stated, from my perspective, I think Owen's neurodivergence pushes them to rely even heavier on TV to provide more context to the world that they live in. The obsession
they didn't have like any like interpersonal relationships, like even like he like has to make up that they're still friends with a boy from before, and it's very clear they don't have any friends. Like they don't have any like real life things to learn from.
And that's also why I'm like neurodivergent. Put the stamp on there. I don't know. But yeah, it pushes them to rely even more on TV as like context, as like what the world is. And the obsession with the pink opaque being so much deeper than just enjoying the show, it being a beacon of hope and light, of feeling less alone because they're so isolated. And looking to the screen to explain what they don't have context or words to understand fully. In an article titled Jane Schoenbrun's twisty horror film I Saw the TV Glow evokes trans adolescence in a hazy 90s suburbia on ABC Net, I think Australia.au. They describe this moment, stating, for trans people, the immediate sense of intense identification, colloquially referred to as the egg crack, is a moment that sets in motion a journey of gender discovery. Schoenbrun, who had just started transitioning when they wrote the film, set out to articulate not just the turmoil of dysphoria, but the experience of slowly pulling themselves out of a false reality and beginning the process of working up the courage to come out into transition. The pink opaque was that egg crack moment for Owen, but the fear of the unknown, as Gabe was saying, like of what that truly meant, kept Owen in this false reality. And the safety that the glow of the TV provided for many millennial youth is just deeply relatable. And the nostalgia we feel towards the shows that raised us, had dinner with us, showed us how to be a person in ways our parents never did, is like real. And yeah. And also it's like, there's something gross about like what is the word? Commodification of our nostalgia that like has been exploited for a lot of years at this point, because they know that like the dopamine, the little tiny drips of dopamine that we received from these shows growing up, like we'll put out money to pay for things that remind us of that like beacon of hope that we had, even if it's like the streaming services, you rewatch the show and you're like, oh, that wasn't as good. But
you
know, they commodified the heck out of it ultimately. But unfortunately, because much of our media was drenched in biases of those in power, we only sometimes would get gems that provided that pillar of relation. And like sometimes the characters were coded queer or neurodivergent, but not explicitly labeled as such. Like sometimes you would get like actual representation, but that was one thing. Like I'm gonna talk about Degrassi a little bit. It's like one of my special interests. It's like I know way too much about Degrassi, but it was something from the 90s and early 2000s that from a representation standpoint did a lot like of good things, but also like harm, because there was like not necessarily accurate to the experiences they were trying to represent. So specifically in like the LGBTQIA identities, There were many instances where they had actors play queer characters that were not queer in real life. Like there was thinking specifically of Adam and Riley's characters. So Riley was gay and Adam was trans, and both actors that played those characters did not have that experience in real life. So like the representation is not necessarily accurate. Or thinking of Connor, who is like the only real autistic character that they have in the show, is not played by an autistic actor. And just thinking a lot of like similar shows, like we have Ugly Betty, we have that has trans representation that is performed by an actress who's not actually trans in real life. There's so many shows in the early 2000s and like 90s that had performances of representation that were not actually like authentic to the true experience that they were representing. So you could only do so much in providing context that we needed to know for who we are.
Yeah, it's no Heartbreak High 23, you know?
Yeah. I wish I had Heartbreak High growing up so bad. It's fine.
Yeah, the new one.
New one, clarifying. Highly recommend watching that, by the way. I made Gabe watch it all the way through, and then they watched it with purpose and happiness after the initiation of me making them watch it. It was great.
Faster than you.
Yeah, you watched it even quicker than me. It's crazy. But we talk all the time in the Ghouls of like how important representation is in media and how that can have lasting impacts on people as they form an understanding of who they are, as well as accepting of others. Like any identity deemed other, to be more inclusive and accepting, you need representation of it in the media, in the history, and everything that you have in the world, so that people have context to understand stuff. And they're also going to be way more willing to accept stuff if they have the context. And if it's not something that's weird or other or alien, like, you know, the media we see holds an important mirror to our understanding of self and the world that we have around us. So when unpacking identity and who we are in relation to the world, media is a beacon of hope that can make us feel this sense of belonging and give us language and tools to explore who we are safely. And the Ghouls have talked about this a lot over the years, and media acting as a cue to who we are and grow as people. And as a screen being a pathway to information about the world and providing context to who we are. Truths about ourselves that cannot be unseen, and both a fear and acceptance surrounding that. So if you feel like Owen, ultimately, media matters in helping you see who you are and knowing that context. So we should fight for the media that provides that representation in an authentic way. In an article I mentioned earlier, Sherbrun speaks to how media impacted them and their understanding of self. So Gabe, you mentioned so many times about like Buffy, and like they talk a lot about how Buffy specifically influenced this film a lot because that was like their safety show growing up. So they say, as an adult who now proudly identifies as non-binary, Sherbrun's relationship with the media that once provided a lifeline has grown more distant. They recently revisited Buffy for the first time since early transition, a process that likened to meeting up with an ex. And they say, I could immediately return to everything that had meant to me, how much of myself I poured into it, all of those moments that just meant so much to me. They were my definition of being in love at one point. And while the characters in Sherbrun's films grapple with the dissociative sensation of watching themselves on screen, the filmmaker can perhaps now glance back from the other side where their life has better kinds of love in it and a relationship with TV. And it felt painful to remember, they say. I felt a lot of sympathy for the kid who needed Buffy that bad. So like recognizing like when you're watching those nostalgia shows, like they might not hit the same, but like you just feel like connected to your child self, your kid version of you who needed that so badly as like a beacon of hope. And like sometimes rewatching that stuff can actually be healing. But we see like in the actual Pink Opaque, like when Owen rewatches it, it like hits so differently. It's like weird.
Yeah, it's like wonky.
Yeah, it's no longer like this beacon of hope and is now a reminder of like how lost they were growing up. And I don't know if they feel like a sympathy towards it. They have that like awakening and then their dad like pushes their head underwater and it was awful. But but to close my section, I'll leave with Sherbrun's words on what they hoped the film would do. Gabe, you kind of touched on this too. It's like they said, since the debut at this year's Sundance Film Festival, I Saw the TV Glow has inspired a range of fervid reactions. The film can alienate as much as it comforts, offering few straightforward answers for screen gazers, queer audiences, and all others who succumb to its enigmatic allure. Schoenbrunn says that the kind of cinema that I really believe in is a cinema that lingers, that says something that's not as simple as like a moral. So much of the art that held their hand through life, I try to make sure that every movie isn't wasted. It's such a hard work to make something, and the only way I know how to do it is to make something incredibly personal that people can engage with in a very deep and hopefully visceral way. So I will say their intent there, I think, did come through, because was the emotions that I felt. So
yeah, it was big ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah, I resonate with all those things, especially like the second puberty, the like finding yourself again. Like I relate to that, and you know, I've had really candid conversations with friends of similar age group where we're like, man, I wish we had the even a fraction of the safety that kids these days have to be themselves. And that's also something like, you know, I was talking to a friend who has a young child, and, you know, she was just expressing like, this is such a wonderful thing for themselves to experience, to see this kid really figuring themselves out and like be weird and wacky and like, you know, be confident in that weird wackiness that they have, and thinking like, wow, like, you know, growing up, I didn't have that opportunity to do that. And that's what I definitely felt when watching this film was, you know, we really we were really like, we had to push things down and find moments where we could escape through TV and those scant little parts of representation, like you said, and usually faulty representation. Like I couldn't tell you, like I could probably count on one hand the amount of times I've seen like a Latina person on screen, and be like, that one's me, you know. Cheetah Girls, that's one of them.
Yeah.
Okay, shout out. And honestly, the best singer of the group. Okay, anyone
That's
who's
true.
trying to say Raven was up there, excuse me. Someone wasn't listening.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I think they accomplished what they set out to do. I felt very connected. I do feel like this is very much a millennial film, and there's no way to argue against it, obviously, like, because it literally takes place in that, but there's just so much to it that just like, not even just like the aesthetic of it, but just like the society around it is definitely
a lot of the quips from like the people like that were when they were being gross or mean to Owen. I was like, I've heard literal human beings say those exact words to me.
Yeah.
Like with different contexts, I guess, but like, you know, like that show isn't something a girl would like to watch or whatever. Like he's saying,
like, isn't that a show
I was
for
like,
girls?
My literal dad.
Yeah.
But I'm like, ow.
Yeah, I
want to punch them in the face in defense of Owen. What the
How many
heck?
times he was like, no, that's a girl toy, or like, that's like, excuse me?
It's
like,
so rude.
Yeah.
It's like, can we just not gender conform, please?
All the non-binary like folks who were just told they were like a tom girl or tomboy growing up, like there's like a bunch of us who were like, was that what
maybe
it was?
It's more than that. My Zoe Deschanel phase was intentional as a rejection of that, and I regret it.
No,
I wish really I could have just been. I know I was really cute, but that's fine.
You're still really cute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, all that to say, like, I appreciate this film. Let us know if you did too, and what like, if you are a millennial, right? What was your comfort TV show? What was the thing that you could watch over and over and over and over again, and feel seen while watching?
Yeah.
I'd really have to think about what mine is.
You know?
Yeah, like what would lead you to scream in a fun spot? I don't know what mine was. Maybe Supernatural.
Yeah, I feel like
I didn't. Yeah,
my egg crack was TikTok. It took me way too long to pick up the signs. Like I always thought something was wrong. Like I was not. It's like messed up. But like I was like there's something different about me, and I just could not put my finger on it, and I did not have words for it. And I was just like, I would see stuff in media, but it like wouldn't exactly be right. I would say it's TikTok and then Quinny in Heartbreak High. I think that was like the second one where I was like, oh, oh, I now see something that feels like tangible to what I think I experienced in some ways. So I was like, but also it wasn't exact either. It was just like,
Yeah.
I think it was TikTok that really opened my eyes to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think like my understanding of my queerness was pretty active for a long time. I just didn't have words for it.
Yeah.
There are times where like I try to go to like nostalgia, where I'm like, I'm gonna watch this movie or do this thing, like watch this TV show from my youth, and I'm like, oh no, this was one of those moments. This is like watching John Tucker Must Die and being like, I don't care about John Tucker. I don't care about
You
John
do
Tucker.
not care about John
I
Tucker.
care about every single woman that John Tucker was dating.
Yeah.
Bush is my wifey for lifey.
Yeah. No, that's super real. Where it's like, you're like, I really like this character more than just liking them, You're like, they're beautiful. And I'm obsessed.
It's like, Bring It On. I was like, I'm in love with everyone who's on screen and Bring It On.
Yeah.
It's like, and I was like, the boys kind of cute too. I was like, I'll take them all. Like we had the Mummy, we had a lot of them. So, it just like didn't have specifically the words for them. And I think that was, or the safety to really explore those things. So just thankful that like newer generations get to do that. And I get to see that. And it is kind of like healing for my inner child to see happen. Because I'm like, oh, that means there's like one less Owen, in the world. And then I hope there's no more Owens.
And unfortunately, like, because of what's happening in society, like, we just have to defend that hope that we're witnessing in this younger generation with like everything we have. Like,
and those safeties, because it's more than what we had, but it is not nearly enough, right? And it's under attack all the time, constantly, and in such an absurd way. And it's harmful. I wonder too, like the difference of harm between like erasure and just like outright villainizing. Like there's like, those are two different kinds of harms. And so I do wonder what comes from that, from those the poor kids who get a taste of being themselves and then are told that that's wrong. Versus the people who are just tampering it down, And I'm sure we'll see that in a few years. And so, I think, protect the Owens that you see and know. And the Maddies too. Like she had nothing. And she just happened to be just a little, I don't want to say braver, because I don't want to say, like, I think Owen was just, like, just didn't want to take that chance. And I don't think that's, like, lack of bravery. I think it's, like, it's a choice, right? Where Maddie was, like, for her, there was no other choice. It's like, I have to go.
And I think also, like, it wasn't explicitly explored necessarily, but, like, I think her whiteness and his blackness did play a part, because in his skin he couldn't be himself either in the world that he lived in. And she felt a little more empowered to do that in her whiteness. I don't know if that's real. No,
I mean, and he was also biracial and had like a rather aggressive father figure who did that as well. And I think it's also like a big thing too that Maddie was femme presenting. And was also a femme person on the outside. Like her queerness was like, she was like a lesbian, and she had definitely like absolutely valid. I think there's an extra step to the fact that Owen was trans too. That made it even more difficult to fight against.
I wholeheartedly agree.
It
made me think a lot. This film, I'll give it that.
I think that I agree, it did that to me. I'm so glad that we watched it and so glad we covered it. Again, let us know how you feel. And that is closing out our Teenagers Scared the Living Shiz Out of Me series, which was nice and long and educational. I learned a lot about the different generations and how you should hug every kid all the time and give them grace and care, because it's hard being out there in the world, and the world is hard all the time. And so I really appreciated this series as usual. And so we're going to be coming back in October for the 8th season of Ghouls, which is kind of crazy.
Here so long. You've witnessed our growth in real time. Hopefully not in a deteriorating, suffocating way. And instead of like a really nice, look at us grow and find happiness and comfortableness in our skin and all that.
Yeah, and we're counting down to episode 300. We have 15 episodes left.
That's crazy.
Before we hit 300, which is really crazy, and it's come a long way. Let us know what your favorite episode is, if you can remember all the way back then. And maybe don't listen to all the ones.
I don't think they were the beginning ones that were anyone's favorite. I think they're probably in the more recent years. At least that's my assumption.
You let us know. Yeah. And let us know what you might want to see us do in the new year when we're covering 300, where we break 300. If there's things you want to see, topics you want to see covered, anything like that. And as always, don't get married.
Let your kids. And if your kids aren't eaten, protect them.
Yeah.
That's where I would like it.
Yeah, protect your kids. Don't let them get eaten. Don't let them have to bury anything.
Yeah. And then defend them. From the forces that'll be like, don't do that. You'll be like, nah, they're Mr. Gonna do it, and I will fight you.
Break them out of the midnight realm.
Yeah.
All right, bye.
Bye.